The gold pocket watch gleamed in the harsh Nebraska sunlight as Sarah Everton held it up with trembling fingers, her last connection to a life that felt like it belonged to someone else entirely. North Platte in the summer of 1878 was a town that lived and breathed with the railroad, a place where fortunes could be made or lost in the span of a season. And Sarah had learned that lesson the hardest way possible. The watch had belonged to her husband Thomas, who had died 6 months earlier when his horse threw him during a cattle drive, leaving her with nothing but debts, a failing ranch, and this single piece of silver that might fetch enough money to keep her fed for another month or two. She stood outside the general store, her worn calico dress doing little to protect her from the July heat, her dark blonde hair pulled back in a simple bun that had seen better days. At 24 years old, she felt ancient, worn down by grief and the crushing weight of survival. The watch dangled from its chain, spinning slowly, catching the light and drawing the attention of passers-by, who either looked away quickly or stared with the kind of pity that made her skin crawl. "How much you asking for it?" came a voice that startled her from her thoughts. Sarah turned to find a man she had seen around town but never spoken to, tall and lean with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy, dusty leather chaps over worn denim, a faded blue shirt, and a hat that had clearly weathered many seasons. Something in his expression was different from the looks she had been getting, no pity there, just genuine curiosity and something else she could not quite name. $20, she said, hating how her voice wavered. "It is solid silver, good craftsmanship." The man stepped closer, close enough that she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the kind that came from squinting into sun and wind. He could not have been much older than 30, she guessed, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and a face that might have been handsome if not for the serious set of his jaw. "That is a fine piece," he said, but he was not looking at the watch anymore. He was looking at her, really looking, as though he could see past the worn dress and tired eyes to something underneath. "But I am guessing you do not really want to sell it." Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the weather. "What I want does not much matter. I need to eat, need to pay what I owe before they take what little I have left." "The old Everton place out past Miller Creek," she nodded, surprised he knew. "Not that there is much left worth taking. The cattle went to pay the funeral expenses, the horses sold off one by one to cover debts. This watch is all I have that is worth anything." The stranger was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving from the watch to her face and back again. Then he did something that shocked her completely. He reached out and gently closed her fingers around the watch, his hand warm and calloused against hers. "Keep it," he said firmly. "I will help you instead." Sarah pulled her hand back as though burned. "I do not need charity. Good, because I am not offering any." His mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile but something warmer than the serious expression he had worn before. "Name is Nathan Kane. I work for the Triple Bar Ranch, been saving my wages for a few years now, looking for an investment opportunity. Seems to me a working ranch with good land and water rights is exactly what I have been looking for." "The ranch is not for sale," Sarah said automatically, even though she knew it was only a matter of time before the bank took it anyway. "I am not looking to buy," Nathan said patiently. "I am proposing a partnership. I provide the labor and the capital to get the place running again. You provide the land and the knowledge of how your husband ran things. We split the profits fair and square until you are back on your feet. Then we can renegotiate terms." Sarah stared at him, trying to find the angle, the catch, because in her experience, men did not offer help without expecting something in return. "Why would you do this? You do not even know me." Nathan shifted his weight, looking briefly uncomfortable. I knew your husband, not well, but enough to know he was a good man who worked hard and treated people fair. Heard he left a wife behind, heard she was struggling. Maybe I am just tired of watching good people lose everything while others profit from their misery. Maybe I think it is a sound business proposition. Does the reason matter so much? She wanted to say yes, that it mattered very much, but the truth was she had run out of options and pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. What would people say? A widow woman and a single man working a ranch together. People will talk no matter what you do, Nathan said with a shrug. But if it concerns you, I can bunk in the old foreman's cabin, keep everything proper and above board. I am not asking for anything except a chance to build something worthwhile. Sarah looked down at the watch in her hand, at the inscription on the back that read to Thomas, with love always. She thought about what her husband would want for her, whether he would want her to sell off the last piece of him to survive another few weeks, or whether he would want her to take a chance on something that might lead to a real future. All right, she said finally, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. But I want everything in writing, proper legal papers drawn up so we both know where we stand. Fair enough, Nathan agreed. We can go see Judge Morrison this afternoon, get everything documented official. In the meantime, why do not you show me the ranch? Let me see what we are working with. The ride out to the ranch took the better part of an hour. Sarah on the old mare that was too ancient to sell and Nathan on a sturdy bay gelding that moved with the easy grace of a well-trained cow pony. They did not talk much during the journey, but the silence was not uncomfortable. Sarah found herself stealing glances at her unexpected partner, trying to figure him out, wondering what she had agreed to. The ranch looked even more depressing than usual as they approached, the fences sagging, the barn in need of paint, the house itself smaller and more weathered than she remembered. It had never been a grand place, but Thomas had kept it neat and functional, and seeing it fallen into such disrepair made her heart ache with fresh grief and shame. Nathan dismounted and stood for a long moment, his eyes moving over everything with the practiced assessment of a man who knew ranching. Sarah braced herself for disappointment, for him to realize what a poor investment this truly was, and change his mind about the whole arrangement. Good bones, he said finally. Land looks solid, plenty of grass, and if I remember right, Miller Creek runs year-round even in drought years. It does, Sarah confirmed, surprised he had noticed. That was one of the reasons Thomas chose this place. He said water was worth more than gold in this country. He was right about that. Nathan walked toward the barn and Sarah followed, watching as he examined the structure with careful attention. Roof needs patching, some of the boards need replacing, but the frame is sound. We can have this fixed up in a week or two with the right supplies. We do not have money for supplies, Sarah reminded him, hating how defeated she sounded. I do, Nathan said simply. That is my part of the investment. You let me worry about the finances for now. What we need from you is knowledge. How many head of cattle did your husband usually run? What were his grazing rotations? Where did he sell, and who were his buyers? They spent the next several hours going over every detail of the ranch operation. Nathan asking questions that showed he knew his business, and Sarah answering as best she could from what Thomas had shared with her. She had paid more attention than most wives might have, curious about the work that consumed so much of her husband's time and energy, and now she was grateful for that curiosity. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the Nebraska sky in shades of orange and pink, Nathan surveyed the house with a critical eye. You have been living here alone all this time, Sarah nodded. Could not afford to hire help, and most folks have their own troubles to worry about. Something in his expression softened. That changes now. First thing tomorrow we will ride into town, get those papers drawn up legal, and then we will make a list of everything we need. Lumber, nails, paint, wire for the fences. We will need cattle too, at least 50 head to start, maybe more if we can manage it. And chickens, a milk cow, pigs if we can afford them. No point running a ranch if you are going to starve while doing it. The scope of what he was proposing made Sarah's head spin. That will cost a fortune. It will cost what it costs, Nathan said with a shrug. I have been saving for 5 years, living in bunkhouses and eating trail food, not spending money on whiskey or cards like most of the hands. I have got enough to do this right, but only if we are smart about it and work hard. I am not afraid of hard work, Sarah said, lifting her chin. Nathan's expression changed, something warm entering those storm-gray eyes. I can see that. Truth is, Mrs. Everton, I think you have been working harder than anyone should have to, trying to keep this place going on your own. That ends today. That night, after Nathan had settled himself in the foreman's cabin and Sarah had prepared a simple supper of beans and cornbread that they shared at her kitchen table, she found herself lying awake in the darkness, listening to the familiar sounds of the house and thinking about how much had changed in the span of a single day. She had started the morning prepared to sell the last thing she owned of value, and now she had a partner, a plan, and something she had not felt in months. Hope. It was terrifying. The next morning dawned clear and hot, and Sarah was up before sunrise, years of ranch life having trained her body to wake with the light. She was surprised to find Nathan already up as well, examining the corral fence and making notes in a small leather-bound book. "You are up early," she called out, walking over with 2 cups of coffee she had just brewed. Nathan accepted the cup with a nod of thanks. Range habits. Besides, wanted to get a better look at everything in the daylight, start making a real plan of action. They rode into North Platte together as the town was waking up. Shopkeepers opening their doors and sweeping the wooden sidewalks, early risers heading to the bakery for fresh bread. Sarah was acutely aware of the looks they received, the curious glances and whispered conversations that followed in their wake. Small-town gossip was inevitable, and she knew by nightfall half of North Platte would have heard about her riding into town with Nathan Kane. Judge Morrison was a practical man in his 60s who had presided over countless business arrangements and property disputes. He listened to Nathan's proposal without interruption, occasionally making notes, his weathered face impassive. "This is highly unusual," he said finally. "Not illegal, mind you, but unusual. Mrs. Everton, you understand that you will be entering into a binding agreement. Mr. Kane will have legal rights to half the profits from the ranch for the duration of this partnership." "I understand," Sarah said. "But I want it written that the land itself remains in my name alone. He is investing money and labor. I am providing the property. If the partnership dissolves for any reason, he is entitled to fair compensation for his investment, but the land stays mine." "That is more than fair," Nathan said before the judge could respond. "I want that in there too. I am not looking to take her land just to build something worthwhile." Judge Morrison nodded slowly. "I can have the papers drawn up by this afternoon. You will both need to sign in the presence of witnesses. I will also require a detailed accounting of Mr. Kane's initial investment, and we will need to establish terms for profit distribution." They spent another hour working through the details, and by the time they left the judge's office, Sarah's head was swimming with legal language and financial projections. Nathan seemed unbothered by it all, his focus already shifting to the practical matters of supplies and livestock. The general store was their next stop, and Sarah watched in amazement as Nathan moved through the aisles with purpose, selecting tools and supplies with the practiced eye of someone who knew exactly what was needed. Nails, lumber, paint, rope, wire, work gloves, oil for the hinges and leather, flour, beans, sugar, salt, coffee. The pile grew steadily, and Sarah found herself simultaneously grateful and anxious about the expense. How much is this going to cost? She whispered when Nathan paused to examine a new axe. Do not worry about it, he said quietly. This is my investment, remember. You just focus on helping me figure out what else we need. They left the store with promises of delivery that afternoon and moved on to the stockyard, where Nathan spent nearly an hour negotiating with a cattle buyer named Harrison, who had a herd coming through from Texas. Sarah mostly listened, impressed by Nathan's knowledge and his unwillingness to be cheated. He knew exactly what fair prices should be, knew which animals were healthy and which showed signs of trouble, and he negotiated with a calm firmness that eventually won Harrison's respect. 60 head of mixed breed, healthy stock, delivered to the Everton ranch within the week, Nathan said, shaking on the deal. And I will take you up on that offer of first consideration when you have horses coming through. You drive a hard bargain, Kane, Harrison said, but he was grinning. Your partner is lucky to have you. Nathan glanced at Sarah, and something in his expression made her heart skip oddly. I think maybe I am the lucky one. By the time they returned to the ranch that afternoon, Sarah felt as though she had lived through a week rather than a single day. The supply wagon arrived just before sunset, and Nathan spent the last hours of daylight organizing everything, creating neat piles of lumber and tools, storing the food supplies in the house, planning out the work that would begin in earnest the next morning. Sarah made supper again, this time a more substantial meal of salt pork and potatoes, biscuits and gravy. They ate in companionable silence, both too tired for much conversation, but when Nathan rose to leave, he paused at the door. Thank you, he said quietly, for trusting me. I know this is not easy, letting a stranger into your life like this. Sarah met his eyes, seeing the sincerity there. Thank you for offering, for caring enough to help someone you barely know. Maybe we will not be strangers for long, Nathan said, and then he was gone, walking through the darkness toward the foreman's cabin, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts and a strange warmth in her chest that she was not quite ready to examine too closely. The next weeks passed in a blur of backbreaking work. Nathan proved to be exactly what he had claimed, a tireless worker who knew ranching inside and out. They started each day before dawn, working until they could barely see, repairing fences and buildings, clearing brush, preparing for the arrival of the cattle. Nathan handled the heavier labor, but Sarah worked beside him whenever she could, holding boards while he hammered, mixing paint, clearing debris. Slowly, remarkably, the ranch began to transform. The barn went from weathered gray to a fresh coat of red paint. The fences stood straight and strong, the gates swinging smoothly on oiled hinges. The house got a new roof where the old one had leaked, and Nathan spent an entire day repairing the porch steps that had been dangerously loose. They developed a rhythm, a way of working together that required fewer words as time went on. Nathan would look up, and Sarah would hand him the tool he needed. Sarah would start a task, and Nathan would simply step in to help with the parts that required more strength. They ate meals together, discussing the work and making plans, and gradually Sarah found herself sharing stories about Thomas, about their brief marriage and the dreams they had held for this place. Nathan was a good listener, never interrupting, never offering empty platitudes. He shared some of his own history too, about growing up in Missouri, losing his parents to fever when he was 16, drifting west in search of work and purpose. He talked about the ranches he had worked, the things he had learned, the mistakes he had made along the way. "Never thought I would be lucky enough to have a stake in something like this," he admitted one evening as they sat on the newly repaired porch, watching the sun set over the grassland. "Always figured I would be a hired hand my whole life, working another man's cattle on another man's land." "You are more than a hired hand now," Sarah said softly. "You are my partner. This ranch would not exist without you." Nathan turned to look at her, and the expression in his eyes made her breath catch. "It would not mean half as much without you here." "This is not just about the land or the cattle, Sarah. It is about building something that matters, something that lasts." He had started calling her Sarah rather than Mrs. Everton sometime in the second week, and she had not objected. It had felt natural, right, just as it felt right to be sitting here beside him as the day ended, tired but satisfied with what they had accomplished. The cattle arrived on schedule, 60 head of good breeding stock that Nathan and Sarah spent days getting settled onto their new range. Nathan hired 2 temporary hands from town to help with the initial work, young men eager for the wages and experience, and Sarah watched with growing confidence as Nathan directed the operation with calm efficiency. "You are good at this," she told him one afternoon, watching as he expertly cut out a calf that needed attention. "You should have had your own place years ago." "Maybe I was just waiting for the right opportunity," Nathan said, and there was something in his voice that made Sarah think he might not be talking only about the ranch. As summer shifted toward fall, the ranch truly came alive. The cattle thrived on the good grass and plentiful water. Nathan had been right about Miller Creek. It ran strong and clear even when other water sources in the area began to dry up. They acquired chickens from a neighboring ranch, and Sarah took pleasure in collecting eggs each morning, in having fresh poultry for their meals. Nathan surprised her one day by arriving with a gentle milk cow, a young heifer with soft brown eyes that immediately stole Sarah's heart. "Thought you might like having fresh milk and butter," he said, looking almost bashful. "Saw her at the stockyard and remembered you mentioning how much you missed it." It was gestures like that which slowly began to shift something in Sarah's heart. The way Nathan remembered small details, the way he seemed to care about her comfort and happiness beyond the mere practicalities of their business arrangement. He fixed the pump at the kitchen sink, so she did not have to haul water from the well. He brought her wildflowers once, claiming they were just growing near where he was working, but she had seen him ride out specifically to collect them. He listened when she talked, really listened, and his opinions when she asked for them were thoughtful and considerate of her feelings. Sarah had not planned to feel anything beyond gratitude. She had certainly not intended to start looking forward to their shared meals, to the way Nathan's face would light up when she managed to surprise him with something good from the kitchen. She had not meant to notice the way his hands moved when he worked, capable and strong, or the sound of his voice in the morning, rough with sleep, and somehow intimate in its unguarded quality. But feelings, she was discovering, did not much care about intentions. It was in October, when the leaves on the cottonwood trees along Miller Creek had turned gold, and the air carried the first real hint of autumn chill, that everything changed. They had been working on reinforcing the south fence line, a long day of digging post holes and stringing wire under a sky that threatened rain. The storm arrived suddenly, as they often did on the plains, turning the world dark and opening the heavens in a downpour that soaked them both within seconds. They ran for the barn, laughing like children at the sheer absurdity of being caught so completely unprepared, arriving breathless and dripping to stand in the shelter of the big open doorway. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating Nathan's face in stark relief. And Sarah found herself staring at him, at the water running down his face, the way his shirt clung to his shoulders, the drops caught in his dark hair. "We are going to be here a while," Nathan said, looking out at the sheets of rain. "This one looks determined to settle in." Sarah nodded, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body despite their wet clothes. She should step back, should put some proper distance between them, but she found she did not want to. "Nathan," she said softly, and he turned to look at her, his storm-gray eyes finding hers with an intensity that made her heart race. "I need to tell you something." "All right," he said carefully, and she could see him bracing himself as though expecting bad news. This arrangement, this partnership. Sarah took a breath, forcing herself to meet his gaze directly. "It has become more than business for me. You have become more than a business partner." She watched emotions flicker across Nathan's face, surprise and hope, and something that looked like relief so profound. It was almost painful to witness. "Sarah, I have been trying not to say anything, trying to keep things proper and respectful because you are a widow and I did not want to take advantage or make you uncomfortable. But if I am being honest, I started having feelings for you about 2 days after we started this whole thing." 2 days. Sarah felt a laugh bubble up, part nervous, part delighted. Nathan reached up, gently brushing a wet strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Maybe even before that. Maybe the moment you were standing there in town, holding that watch, looking so damn determined not to cry even though your world was falling apart. You were the bravest thing I had ever seen." "I do not feel very brave," Sarah whispered, but she leaned into his touch, into the warmth of his palm against her skin. "That is what makes you brave," Nathan said. "You are scared and you do it anyway. You keep going when most people would have given up. You took a chance on a stranger because it was the only option left, and you have worked harder than any person I have ever known to make this place survive. How could I not fall for you?" Sarah reached up to cover his hand with hers. "I loved my husband. I want you to know that. What I feel for you, it does not diminish what Thomas and I had." "I know," Nathan said gently. "I would never ask you to forget him. He was part of making you who you are, and I happen to think you are pretty damn remarkable." This time when lightning lit the sky, Sarah did not look away from Nathan's face. "Kiss me," she said, barely recognizing her own voice, but knowing with absolute certainty that it was what she wanted. Nathan did not need to be asked twice. He cupped her face in both hands, tilting her head up, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her knees weak. His lips were soft despite the weathered roughness of the rest of him, gentle but sure, asking a question that Sarah answered by sliding her arms around his neck and pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, becoming something more urgent, months of denied attraction and growing affection pouring into the connection between them. Nathan's hands moved to her waist, holding her securely, and Sarah let herself get lost in the sensation, in the taste of him, in the solid reality of his body pressed against hers. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for so long." "Me too," Sarah admitted. "I was afraid, though. Afraid of what people would say, afraid it was too soon, afraid I was being disloyal to Thomas's memory. And now," Sarah pulled back just enough to look into his eyes, "now I think Thomas would want me to be happy. I think he would approve of you, of what you have done for this place for me. And I think I am tired of being afraid of living again." They stood there for a long time, holding each other while the storm raged outside, not talking but not needing to. When the rain finally eased to a drizzle, they walked back to the house hand in hand. And Sarah invited Nathan inside properly for the first time, not just for a meal but to stay, to sit with her by the fire and talk about something beyond work and plans. They talked until late into the night, about dreams and fears, about the future they might build together. Nathan was clear that he wanted to court her properly, to do things right despite the unconventional circumstances of their meeting. Sarah appreciated that, but she also made it clear that she was not interested in a long engagement. "Life is too short and too uncertain," she said firmly. "I learned that when I lost Thomas. If we are going to do this, I want to really do it, not dance around it for years because of what people might think." Nathan grinned at that. "So you are saying you want to marry me?" Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she did not back down. "If you are asking, then yes. But only if you are sure. I come with a ranch and debts and probably a reputation now, and I will not be an easy wife. I have opinions and I am not good at keeping quiet when I think something is being done wrong." "Good," Nathan said, pulling her close and kissing her soundly. "I do not want an easy wife. I want you, exactly as you are, stubborn and strong and absolutely remarkable." They were married in November, a small ceremony in town with Judge Morrison officiating and a handful of friends as witnesses. Sarah wore a simple dress of deep blue wool, practical but new, the first new dress she had owned in over a year. Nathan cleaned up remarkably well, she discovered, his dark hair tamed and his jaw freshly shaved, wearing a suit that must have cost him a good portion of his remaining savings. The ceremony itself was brief and to the point, both of them too practical for elaborate vows. But when Nathan slipped a simple gold band onto her finger and promised to love and cherish her for the rest of his days, Sarah felt tears slip down her cheeks. They were not tears of sadness but of gratitude for this second chance, for this good man who had appeared in her life when she needed him most. The wedding supper was held at the hotel, a modest affair but cheerful, and Sarah was touched by how many people came to wish them well. Even some who had gossiped about their arrangement seemed genuinely happy for them now that everything was properly settled and legal. "You are a lucky man, Kane," Harrison the cattle buyer said, raising a glass in toast. "She is too good for you." "I know," Nathan agreed easily, his arm around Sarah's waist. "I intend to spend every day proving I am worthy of her anyway." They spent their wedding night at the hotel, a rare luxury, and Nathan proved to be as tender and considerate a lover as Sarah had suspected he might be. He took his time, learning what pleased her, asking quiet questions, making sure she was comfortable every step of the way. The passion was there too, burning hot beneath the gentleness, and Sarah discovered that desire could exist without guilt, that she could want this new husband without betraying the memory of the old. In the morning, they rode back to the ranch together as husband and wife, and Sarah felt as though she was seeing everything with new eyes. This was truly theirs now, not just a business arrangement but a home they were building together, a future they would share. Winter came to the Nebraska plains with its usual harsh beauty, and Sarah discovered that facing the cold season with a partner made all the difference. The cattle weathered the storms well thanks to the shelters Nathan had built in the fall, and they lost only 2 calves, far better than average for the region. The house stayed warm with wood Nathan had stockpiled, and Sarah spent the long evenings learning to make better bread, experimenting with recipes, occasionally convincing Nathan to teach her card games to pass the time. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other in the way that newlyweds do, but with an added dimension of partnership that Sarah treasured. Nathan valued her opinions on the ranch operations, genuinely listening when she suggested different approaches or remembered something Thomas had done. Sarah found herself learning new skills from Nathan, better ways to handle the horses, tricks for working cattle, understanding of weather patterns and grass quality that she had never considered before. It was a good winter, perhaps the best Sarah had known, and when spring arrived with its promise of new life, she had news that made it even sweeter. She was pregnant, carrying their first child, and the joy on Nathan's face when she told him was something she would remember for the rest of her life. "Are you sure?" he asked, his hand moving to rest gently on her still flat stomach. "When?" "Early fall, I think," Sarah said, covering his hand with hers. "September or October maybe. Are you happy?" "Happy." Nathan pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "Sarah, I am over the moon. I cannot believe I get to have this, a wife I love, a home, a child on the way. A year ago, I never would have dreamed of any of it. The pregnancy was not an easy one." Sarah struggled with sickness in the early months, and Nathan fretted over her constantly, trying to take on more work so she could rest, bringing her ginger tea and dry crackers, worrying himself into a state that would have been annoying if it had not been so endearing. "I am not made of glass," Sarah told him more than once. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I will be fine." "I know," Nathan said, but his worried expression did not change. "But you are my wife, and that baby is mine too, and I am going to worry because I love you both more than anything in this world." How could she argue with that? As summer progressed and Sarah's belly swelled with their growing child, Nathan threw himself into preparing. He fixed up one of the spare rooms as a nursery, building a cradle from scratch with wood he specially ordered from town, sanding it smooth and painting it a soft cream color. He reinforced the fence around the house yard so the baby would have a safe place to play eventually. He even convinced Sarah to hire a woman from town, Mrs. Patterson, to come stay with them for a few weeks before and after the birth, someone experienced who could help with the delivery and teach Sarah about caring for a newborn. "You do not have to do all this," Sarah protested weakly, but she was secretly grateful for all of it, for the way Nathan seemed determined to think of everything. "I want you to have every advantage," Nathan said firmly. "This is our first child, Sarah. I want everything to be right." Their son was born on a cool September evening, arriving after a labor that lasted nearly 12 hours and left Sarah exhausted but triumphant. Nathan had paced the house like a caged animal, Mrs. Patterson finally ordering him outside because his anxiety was making Sarah more tense. When Mrs. Patterson finally called him in to meet his son, Nathan came into the bedroom with tears streaming down his face, completely unashamed of the emotion. "He is perfect," he whispered, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed and looking down at the tiny red-faced infant in Sarah's arms. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas Nathan Kane, honoring both the husband Sarah had lost and the husband she had gained. Little Thomas, they called him, or Tommy, when he was being particularly sweet. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes, and from the very beginning, he had both parents completely wrapped around his tiny fingers. Nathan proved to be a devoted father, getting up in the night to bring Tommy to Sarah for feeding, walking the floor with him when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, talking to his son in a gentle voice that made Sarah fall in love with her husband all over again. She would find them sometimes, Nathan sitting in the rocking chair he had built, Tommy asleep on his chest, both of them peaceful in the afternoon light, and her heart would swell with such love she could barely contain it. The ranch continued to thrive. Word had spread about their success, and they began receiving inquiries from other ranchers interested in buying their cattle or trading for breeding stock. Nathan hired 2 permanent hands, trustworthy young men who worked hard and respected Sarah as much as they did Nathan. The operation expanded gradually, thoughtfully, never taking on more than they could handle but always moving forward. By the time Tommy was 2, Sarah was pregnant again. And this time the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to do. Their daughter arrived in the spring of 1882, a lusty, squalling girl they named Grace Sarah Kane. She had her mother's blonde hair and her father's gray eyes, and from the moment she entered the world, she made it clear she was not to be ignored. "She is going to be a handful, Mrs. Patterson predicted, and she was absolutely right. Where Tommy was quiet and thoughtful, Grace was loud and adventurous. She walked early and climbed everything she could reach, giving both parents regular heart attacks. But she was also affectionate and funny, always ready with a hug or a silly face to make them laugh. Nathan adored her, his little girl, and Sarah watched with amusement as this strong, capable man became completely helpless in the face of his daughter's dimpled smile. The years that followed were full and rich, marked by the cycles of ranch life and the growing of their family. They weathered hard winters and dry summers, years when the cattle prices were high and years when they barely scraped by, but through it all they had each other. The partnership they had begun with, that practical business arrangement, had grown into something deep and unshakable, a love built on trust and hard work and shared dreams. When Tommy was 10 and Grace was 8, Sarah found herself pregnant once more, a surprise at 33 but a welcome one. This baby, another boy they named Lucas Nathan, arrived easily and settled into the family as though he had always been meant to be there. Tommy was old enough to be a real help, carefully watching his baby brother while Sarah worked, and Grace appointed herself the baby's personal entertainer, constantly singing to him or making funny faces to elicit his rare smiles. Nathan, now 41 and with silver beginning to thread through his dark hair, looked at their 3 children and shook his head in wonder. "How did I get so lucky?" he asked Sarah one evening as they sat together on the porch, watching the older children play in the yard while Lucas slept in his cradle nearby. "We both got lucky," Sarah said, leaning into his shoulder. "The day you told me to keep that watch, that you would help me instead. That was the day everything changed." Nathan pulled the watch from his pocket, the same watch Sarah had been trying to sell all those years ago. She had given it to him on their first anniversary, wanting him to have it, to carry a piece of their history with him. He had carried it every day since, a reminder of where they had started and how far they had come. "Best decision I ever made," Nathan said, opening the watch to check the time, a gesture Sarah had seen him make thousands of times. "Telling you to keep this, offering to help. I was not even sure you would say yes, but I had to try. Something about you just called to me, made me want to be better, to build something that mattered." "You did build something that matters," Sarah said softly. "Look around, Nathan. This ranch, our children, the life we have made together. It all started because you were kind enough to help a widow who was out of options. You could have walked past me that day, but you did not. You stopped, you offered help, and you changed both our lives." Nathan kissed her temple, a gesture of affection so familiar now it was like breathing. "I love you, Sarah Kane. Every single day I love you more." "I love you too," Sarah said, and meant it with everything she had. The ranch continued to grow and prosper over the following years. Tommy showed a real aptitude for working with the horses, eventually taking over that aspect of the operation entirely. Grace, to everyone's surprise, developed a head for business, keeping the books and managing the finances with a skill that surpassed both her parents. Lucas, when he was old enough, proved to be his father's son through and through, a natural cowboy who lived for the work and the land. Sarah and Nathan watched their children grow with pride and occasional terror, as all parents do. There were the normal challenges, the childhood illnesses and injuries, the teenage rebellions and first heartbreaks, but through it all the family remained strong, bound together by love and shared purpose. On their 20th anniversary, Nathan organized a celebration that surprised Sarah completely. He had been planning it for months apparently, with the help of the children and several friends in town. And when Sarah arrived at what she thought was just a normal town dance, she found instead a party specifically in their honor. The whole community had turned out, people whose lives had been touched by the Kane family over the years, all gathered to celebrate the marriage that had started with such an unlikely beginning. "You did all this?" Sarah asked Nathan, stunned by the decorations and the food and the genuine warmth on the faces around them. "I wanted everyone to know how much I love you," Nathan said, taking her hand. "Wanted to celebrate not just surviving together but thriving, building a life that matters." They danced that night, Sarah in Nathan's arms as they had so many times over the years, moving together with the ease of long practice. Her hair was more gray than blonde now, and Nathan's face showed the lines of a life lived outdoors, but Sarah thought he was more handsome than ever, weathered and real and wholly hers. "No regrets?" Nathan asked softly as they turned slowly around the floor. "Not a single one," Sarah said honestly, "except maybe that I did not meet you sooner." "We met exactly when we were supposed to," Nathan said with the certainty that came from 2 decades of proof. "I was not ready for you before that. I needed those years working and saving and learning so I could be the man you deserved, the partner you needed." As they grew older, Sarah and Nathan gradually turned over more of the daily ranch operations to their children, though neither ever fully retired. They were most often found working in Sarah's expanded garden, which over the years had grown to include not just vegetables but flowers and herbs, fruit trees and berry bushes. It had become a place of beauty and peace, and neighbors often commented that the Kane garden was worth a visit just for the view. Tommy married at 23, bringing home a sweet-natured girl named Emily who loved horses nearly as much as he did. They built a house on the north section of the ranch and started their own family, giving Sarah and Nathan 3 grandchildren in quick succession. Grace surprised everyone by falling in love with a banker from Omaha, a city man who nevertheless adapted to ranch life with good humor and genuine effort. They had 2 daughters, both of whom inherited their mother's business sense and their grandmother's stubborn determination. Lucas remained unmarried longer, focused on the work, but eventually found love with a teacher who came to North Platte from back east, a woman who saw past the rough cowboy exterior to the gentle soul underneath. Sarah lived to see all her grandchildren grown, some with children of their own, the Kane family spreading and growing like the ranch itself. She was 78 when she finally passed, peacefully in her sleep after a long, full day of working in her beloved garden. Nathan found her in the morning, still in their bed, looking peaceful, and though his heart shattered, he could not regret a single moment of their 40 years together. He lived 2 more years, unable to quite thrive without her, though he tried for the sake of the children and grandchildren. He spent his time telling stories about Sarah, about how brave she had been, how strong, how she had been willing to take a chance on a stranger when she had nothing left to lose. He told about the pocket watch, about the moment he had told her to keep it, that he would help her instead, and how that single decision had led to the greatest love of his life. When Nathan finally passed at 81, the family buried him next to Sarah on a hill overlooking the ranch, the land they had built together, the legacy they had created. The double headstone reads simply, "Nathan Kane and Sarah Kane, beloved partners in all things." The ranch continued under the management of their children and grandchildren, thriving still, a testament to what two people could build when they combined desperation with compassion, business sense with genuine love. The Kane family became something of a legend in the area. The story of the widow who had been about to sell her last possession, and the cowboy who had offered help, instead repeated and embellished until it took on the quality of myth. But those who had known Nathan and Sarah knew the truth was better than any myth. They had been real people who had faced real struggles and overcome them through hard work, commitment, and abiding love. They had taken the worst moment of Sarah's life and transformed it into something beautiful, building not just a successful ranch, but a family and a legacy that would last for generations. The pocket watch remained in the family, passed down through the years, each generation learning the story of how their family began. It became tradition to tell the tale at weddings, a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from the worst moments, that help offered freely can transform lives, and that love, when it is real and true, can overcome any obstacle. The watch still kept perfect time,